It was Valentine's Day. Broken shards of glass crunched under my feet as I crept through the wreckage that used to be my home. The place was in a pretty bad shape. The TV was smashed, all furniture was slashed, and the word cheetah was scrawled across the walls, written in bright red lipstick. I remained calm, knowing that if I gave in to any of the emotions I felt, the floodgates would open. The fear, the anger, the sadness. It was impossible to discern which one was strongest. I surveyed the damage, steadily pacing through the shattered remnants of my life. Each room was as bad as the last. I started to head upstairs, where I heard a soft whimpering emanating from my bedroom. Fearing the worst, I peeled the door open, unveiling Claire, handcuffed to my bed. I'll start from the beginning. I was in what I thought was a pretty decent relationship with my college sweetheart, Emma. We'd been together for a few years, and honestly, I was convinced we were going to spend the rest of our lives with each other. Things seemed to change though when I gave her the key to my house. I wanted her to move in, but instead of accepting my attempt at a romantic gesture, it triggered something sinister inside of her. She became erratic, accusing me of offering the key to distract from what was really going on. For some reason, she'd gotten it into her head that I was cheating on her. I never did though. Well, not really. There were a few times during college that I got with a couple of her friends, but it was before we were official, and aside from a few passive aggressions here and there was never an issue made out of it. Emma had always been quite stubborn, and once something was in her head, she wouldn't let it go. She became increasingly unstable towards the end, and things reached a boiling point one weekend after a few too many drinks. Despite my desperate assurance that nothing was going on, she wouldn't stop screaming at me, and eventually we broke up. It wasn't too long after that a message came through on Facebook from Claire, who was one of Emma's friends from back in the day. It was the usual long time no see kind of shtick, but her intentions were abundantly clear from the off, which was cemented when she said we should go for coffee sometime. It had barely been a fortnight since the breakup, but I was feeling pretty lonely and at the very least thought it'd be a nice rebound hookup. I met up with Claire in town and we hit it off, so over the course of the next couple of weeks, coffee turned to drinks at a bar, which naturally resulted in me inviting her back to mine. We pulled up outside my house, but before we even got out of the taxi, I could see a pool of red trickling down the path. Scrawled across my door from frame to frame, the word cheetah in huge letters. It must have been a quick job, because the bucket of paint and brush was still there. I recognized them instantly. They'd both been taken from my shed. Claire barely paid any attention to it, but I was embarrassed beyond belief. "What a psycho," she said as she slunk her arm into my jacket, caressing the small of my back so intimately that I almost didn't even care. She picked up the brush and calmly, yet quite seductively, began making long strokes on the wood. "This is a better colour anyway," she assured me before dabbing a splash of paint on my nose. "Why don't you go take a shower while I finish up?" I wasn't thinking with my head at this point. It was an offer that no man could refuse. I'd already showered in the morning, but went up anyway to make sure I was extra clean. When I emerged, Claire was sprawled out on the sofa, armed with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. I'll spare you the sordid details of what happened next, but I completely forgot about Emma. That was until a little later, when I opened up my phone to check my messages, and found that I was locked out of all my socials. I tried logging into Facebook, but someone had changed my password. I searched for my account and the embarrassment I felt earlier resurfaced when I saw my latest status update. "I'm a cheetah," it read. Scrolling through, it had been posted several times. I checked Twitter and was greeted with the same announcement. I shot to my feet, pacing back and forth as I slapped my cheeks. Claire stood behind me, rubbing my shoulders, trying to calm me down, but the fuse had already been blown. "I have to call her," I muttered. My hands shook from adrenaline as I searched through my phone book for her number. "I'm not sure that's the best idea. She's clearly obsessed," Claire said, but then a little smile emerged. "Well, maybe you just need to let her know that it's over." I called Emma, who picked up almost instantaneously. "Hey, how are you doing?" she mumbled softly through tears. I have to admit, hearing her in an upset state made my heart melt a little, and I might have gone easier on her if Claire wasn't there for the support. I didn't hold back. I screamed at her the same way she'd screamed at me weeks ago, not giving her the chance to explain her psychotic behavior. Without listening to her reply, I hung up. She called me back seconds later, but Claire snatched the phone from me, tossing it down onto the sofa to free up both of our hands. "Ready for round two?" she smirked. Again, I won't go into details, but the rest of the weekend was pretty wild. Things were going pretty well. It seemed like I had indeed rebounded. Fast forward to Valentine's Day. After I'd finished work, I arrived home and was confronted with the nightmare scenario I described earlier. I had to unscrew a post from my bed, allowing Claire to slip the cuff off. I called the police and they came round to take our statements. I listened in horror as Claire described the ordeal. She said she was sleeping at the time. She woke up to the sound of crashing, chained up like a dog. She didn't see the intruder, but said she could hear a woman's voice shouting "cheater" while the house got turned inside out. The suspect was obvious, the disgruntled ex-girlfriend with a key to my house. We gave the officers Emma's details and they went over to hers to arrest her. Later that night, as me and Claire were in the midst of sweeping up all the broken glass, there was a knock at the door. The police were back. "What did she say?" I inquired. "Did she admit it?" The officer shook his head. He looked over my shoulder at Claire. "Do you mind coming over to the station, miss? We have a few questions we want to ask." "She's been through enough." "It won't take long," he assured us. Claire froze on the spot for a second. She sighed and threw down the broom before slinking over to me. She placed her hands on my shoulders, looking me dead in the eye. "Why don't you start on dinner? There's wine in my bag," she whispered before being escorted to the car. I felt so guilty. Claire had become a part of my life and the baggage attached to it, so I was determined to make it up to her in some way. At the very least, I hoped that we could somehow salvage Valentine's Day with a nice meal. I finished tidying up the kitchen and set the table with candles. Claire's bag was on a stool in the hallway with the bottleneck poking out. I grabbed the wine, but as I pulled it out, I knocked her bag over, spilling its contents onto the floor. I knelt down and put each item back, the usual stuff: her phone, a bit of makeup, and her keys. Inspecting her keys, I recognized the shape. I pulled out my own from my pocket to compare the two, and lo and behold, it was a match. My soul left my body as I registered the truth. I opened up her phone. She was logged into my Facebook account. I felt faint. Scrolling through her texts, I saw a full exchange between her and Emma from months ago. She told Emma that she saw me out for dinner with another girl and that she saw us kiss. The whole notion that I had cheated didn't just come from nowhere. It was planted in her head from an old friend bittered by jealousy. The bag full of lies left me one final clue to nail the coffin shut. I pulled out her lipstick and added an exclamation point to the word that was scrawled across the wall. Realizing it was the same colour, I dropped it to the ground, covering my mouth to stop me from screaming. Emma had been innocent all along. This whole thing was orchestrated by Claire, and I danced for her like a puppet on a string. My heart was shattered into pieces. It was Valentine's Day. and I was alone, broken, betrayed, and cheated. The neon lights flickered as I wiped down the bar counter, preparing for another Friday night at the Whispering Spirits. As the clock struck 9, the door chimed, announcing the arrival of the regulars. Among them, a man in his 40s wearing a worn-out leather jacket. He'd come in every Friday, order a single bottle of beer and retreat to a corner, his eyes like two spotlights following me amidst the hustle. I was used to the routine. He'd nurse that lone bottle for an hour, leaving a $10 tip behind, wrapped up in a note tucked into an empty vessel. At first, the notes were innocent compliments. You're beautiful, and the like. I welcomed the extra cash. Bar business was tough, and those bills paid my rent. As the weeks passed, the notes began to morph into something unsettling. Your smile is intoxicating, one read. Another, I can't resist your charm. The words started to crawl under my skin, but I pushed aside my discomfort, reminding myself of the importance of those tips. Then came the nightmarish turn. The note left on the table one Friday was stark and menacing. You're mine now, it read. A shiver crawled up my spine as I read those words, but I couldn't afford to let fear interfere with my livelihood. I ignored the gut feeling telling me to speak up and focused on the bills in my pocket. The following Friday, the man was absent. A mix of relief and disappointment flooded me. I tried to shake off the unease and convince myself that maybe he had found another place to haunt. That illusion would soon be shattered. One night at home, the doorbell sounded. I opened the door, but there was no one there. There's a lot of kids in the neighborhood, so I assumed it was just another case of ding-dong ditch. Stepping out onto my porch to catch the perpetrators, my foot collided with glass, causing a nauseating echo. There was a bottle. I cautiously approached it, heart pounding. A note protruded from the bottle's neck, and as I unfolded it, I shuddered. You're mine now, it read. I stumbled backwards, my mind racing. How did he know where I lived? On my way to work the following night, paranoia lingered in every darkened alley and quiet street. The bar buzzed with its usual Friday energy, but the man was conspicuously absent. I wondered if he was watching from the shadows, orchestrating his plan. I informed my manager about the situation, and when we had finished locking up, he insisted that he walk me home. We both kept an eye out. The streets were eerily silent that night. We didn't see a soul. My manager tried to console me as we approached the house, offering to spend the night on the sofa, but it was hardly a permanent solution. He told me to call him if another note came by. I set about my usual post-work practices. I switched on the oven and went and got changed. Coming back into the kitchen, I grabbed a pizza out of the freezer and slid it into the preheated oven when a glint of light appeared in my eye, a reflection on glass. There, on the kitchen counter, a bottle. My hands trembled as I pulled out the message. There was no money this time, and the note was blank. I froze in terror, staring at the blank paper when I felt arms creeping around me from behind, gripping my waist. I've got another tip for you here. A menacing voice whispered into my ear. I gasped, terror seizing my senses. Without hesitation, I grabbed the bottle and swung it with desperate force. The glass collided with a sickening thud against the intruder's head. He recoiled, stumbling back, and I seized the opportunity to flee. I ran to my manager's house, who lives a few blocks away from me, which is where I've been staying since. He's been a rock throughout this, and even changed my shifts at work. The house is up for sale, and I haven't gone back yet. I need to at some point though to get my stuff, but every time I think about going back, I bottle it. High school days were a swirl of awkward glances, unspoken crushes, and teenage angst. For me, it all centered around Zoe, the girl with a smile that could melt hearts. Fate, however, had a twisted sense of humor, and my journey through those tumultuous years would be marred by an unsettling sequence of events that I could never erase from my memory. It all started when Zoe's first boyfriend mysteriously vanished. The rumors whispered of a sudden departure, leaving both students and teachers bewildered. Zoe, grief-stricken and confused, soon found solace in the company of my friend Chris. Chris, the academically gifted prodigy, seemed to have it all figured out until one day he too vanished without a trace. This was in the early 2000s, so cell phones weren't as popular as they are today. If you didn't know where someone lived, they were effectively off-grid. Amidst the perplexing disappearances, my own feelings for Zoe continued to grow. Eventually, she asked me out on a date. We decided to catch a movie, opting for the chilling thriller Final Destination 2. Little did I know that the horrors on the screen would pale in comparison to the eerie events that unfolded that night. The cinema was empty, amplifying the suspense of the movie. Zoe and I settled into our seats, but an unsettling presence loomed behind us. A man, whose breath I could feel on my neck, had chosen a seat directly behind us. I dismissed it as a mere coincidence, chalking it up to the quirks of an empty theatre. However, the uncomfortable feeling lingered, casting a shadow over what was supposed to be a romantic evening. As the credits rolled, I thought about making a move, but the guy behind us made the situation too awkward. I mustered the courage to ask Zoe out for dinner the following night. This time, we chose a bustling restaurant, hoping the crowded atmosphere would dispel any lingering unease. Yet, as we enjoyed our meal, my gaze was drawn to a solitary figure sat a few tables away. The same man from the cinema, unmistakably staring at us with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. Dinner ended, and I walked Zoe halfway home, hoping to share a moment away from prying eyes. However, when I attempted to kiss her, she pulled away. Doubt crept in, and I wondered if my feelings were unrequited. The next day my confusion deepened as Zoe invited me to her house. Eager to understand the intricacies of our budding relationship, I headed to her home, unaware that the horrors of the previous night were mere preludes to the darkness that awaited. Upon arriving at Zoe's house, a man opened the door. The same man from the cinema and the restaurant. To my surprise, he turned out to be Zoe's father. He gestured for me to enter and told me to take a seat. A strange tension hung in the air, amplified by his unnerving proximity as he sat right beside me. "Where's Zoe?" I inquired, trying to mask the unease in my voice. "She'll be down in a minute," he replied with a disconcerting smile. Anxious small talk ensued, and the discomfort intensified as he began touching my leg, rubbing my knee. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, and with each passing moment, my unease transformed into genuine fear. 30 minutes later, Zoe had yet to appear, and I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that something was profoundly wrong. Feeling a desperate need to escape the claustrophobic atmosphere, I excused myself to use the bathroom. Zoe's father insisted on showing me the way. As I stood in the bathroom, the fear grew as he entered, disregarding any notion of privacy. "Don't be shy," he leered, his words a sinister undertone to the situation. I started to back up. "Look, I don't know what's going on here, but I think I'm gonna go," I stammered, attempting to navigate the labyrinth of emotions flooding my senses. I rushed down the stairs, my only goal to flee the unsettling environment. The front door was locked. Panic surged as Zoe's father approached with a determined look, extinguishing any hope of a swift exit. Pressed against the locked door, I braced for the worst, expecting violence or confrontation. "Let me out," I screamed, my plea echoing throughout the house. Just as I braced for impact, he did something unexpected. He kissed me on the lips. Shocked and paralysed with fear, I didn't reciprocate, but was too petrified to resist. Over his shoulder, I glimpsed Zoe, watching with a disturbing grin etched across her face. I heard a click as the door unlocked. He looked at me as if his behaviour was completely normal. I shot one last glance at Zoe and could tell by her expression that she had lured me here for this very reason. I left the house and ran down the street, confused and afraid. I've never spoken about this outside of therapy. I suppose it's kind of selfish. I was always worried about the repercussions, but perhaps if I did, I might have saved any of Zoe's future love interests from becoming entangled in her family's twisted games. Like Chris and God knows who else before me, I dropped out of high school after that. It took me a long time to move on, but I don't think I'll ever get over it. I've been in a couple of relationships since, but they don't last long. I always end things when it gets to the point where they ask me to come over to meet their parents.